For this episode, we're going to talk about Archaea, and as always, this is speculative mythology and microbiology. Archaea is its own class of life. It's similar to bacteria in that it's unicellular and prokaryotic, though there are enough differences between Archaea and bacteria that it is its own group. The name Archaea simply means ancient things, and these microbes are very old life forms, and they predate the nucleus. This particular Archaea is in a proposed phylum called the Asgard Archaea. The name of this group comes from a recently discovered field of hydrothermal vents called Loki's Castle. It was at these vents where they discovered a unique type of Archaea that has eukaryotic signature proteins. They simply named the organism after the location, so it's Loki Archaeata. And so they've been naming all of these Archaea after various gods like Odin, Thor, Heimdall, Freya, even Wukong and Prometheus. So it's led to the hypothesis that the Asgard Archaea actually gave rise to eukaryotes such as plants, animals, and fungus. Archaea can live in very extreme environments, and so they evolved when the Earth was in a much more primordial state. They can live in hydrothermic and geothermic vents, hot springs, salt lakes, various anaerobic environments, even inside the gut of animals. Archaea are still in the very early stages of being studied. There's not a lot known about them, especially in regards to the Asgard group of Archaea, which is also why the researchers gave the name Loki to that first one they discovered, because it very much is like a trickster. For a while, it wasn't believed that Archaea cause any diseases, but that's starting to be questioned now. While they're still not considered pathogenic, they do appear in higher numbers around certain diseases. These include things like obesity and anorexia, as well as possibly even cancer and tumors. What's interesting is that when they've transplanted some of these Archaea from one host to another, the second host starts to develop those symptoms, such as obesity. Yet that same species of Archaea is present in the human microflora naturally. Now, I imagine they'll also end up linking Archaea to various growth conditions such as gigantism, dwarfism, and things like Marfan syndrome and other related growth disorders. The theme of Archaea seems to be one of influencing or affecting how cells or organisms grow. Archaea are super important for forests, and they actually help the growth hormones of plants. What Archaea seem to excel at is mutation, which is certainly consistent with the idea that they helped give rise to eukaryotes in the first place. Now, the only belief I really adhere to is that all organisms, from microorganisms to fungus to plants and animals, are intelligent and conscious, which obviously also has huge implications in evolution, not being random adaptations and mutations, but cooperation and competition between microorganisms and decisions that animals and plants themselves make. But besides that, it becomes very reasonable to take a look at mythology and folklore in understanding microorganisms in new ways. Keeping in mind that humans are relatively the same. We experience the same phenomena, we encounter the same forces of nature, the same seasons and cycles of life. The same microorganisms that existed from our ancestors are the same ones we have today, perhaps though in different quantities and distributions. Mythology and microbiology, they fill a lot of holes in each other's perspectives. I don't believe that there's a legitimate reason to discount thousands of years of human experience. In most folk traditions and mythologies around the world, you have this primeval race of supernatural beings. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to stick with the Irish version, which is the Tuatha De Danann and their descendants, which are the Sidhe. They're basically the fairies or the fae folk. They could control the forces and elements of nature. They also kind of occupied the land. They're the sort of spirit of the land itself. Eventually, they got pushed out into the most remote locations of the land. These would become kind of holy grounds or sacred sites that were both feared and revered for having this supernatural quality to them. These sorts of fae folk lived in ancient forests, in hot springs, right? All of the same extreme environments that Archaea are generally known for. So if you were to encroach on their grounds, if you were to enter and be disrespectful to one of the sacred Sidhe forests, you could be cursed. Some of the curses have to do with deformities. You would go in a young man and you would come out an old one. Yet if you were respectful and followed their wishes, you could be rewarded with healing and other gifts. Take the example of the hot spring. If it was clean and well-maintained and left alone, the Archaea would thrive and you could go there and it would be very beneficial and healing. These folk traditions around the world believed that those sites like the hot springs were occupied by these primordial class of supernatural entities. And again, for these ancient forests, when you destroyed them, it sort of unleashed these archaea that could cause all sorts of diseases. But it was ultimately the presence of these ancient beings that they correlated with this sort of magic of the land and the ancestral primordial spirit of the earth. And the Fae, or the Fae folk, is how they personified that and how they understood it. What folklore teaches us is that these are intelligent beings in their own right, and when we mess with some of those systems, there can be consequences and punishments. Archaea are super important for the health and growth of many, many ecosystems. It's because of the location that the Fae folk are said to occupy, and because of the mischievousness, the conditions that they can cause, such as growth issues and old age and sickness of a specific variety, that can allow us to approach something like Archaea in a new imaginative way. We consider many of these genetic growth disorders, like dwarfism and Marfan's and various other conditions, to be related to these folk creatures. As an afterthought, I was thinking about someone like John Cena, who had a growth hormone disorder, and him being very fairy-like in appearance. Even the meme of him being invisible kind of fits in that fairy archetype. He's also very aloof, which seems to be consistent in a lot of the personalities of these people, what would be considered Fae-touched in folklore. And it comes down to the idea that microorganisms, they play a role in the personality, even the genetics, the appearance, and unconsciously how we think and how we interact with people. Through archetypal themes of folklore and mythology, we can gain insight into various themes and behaviors of microorganisms and what they may do and how they may affect things. As a final point of clarification, there's nothing wrong or bad with these things inherently. It's all part of what makes us who we are and the unique qualities of people. But in cases of health conditions and environmental conditions, it could be useful to understand in preventing and remediating and just gaining better understanding.